Hello, everyone, and welcome to the season finale of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, at least the Oracle of Ages season. This is, of course, the podcast where we rank every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, and for this special season finale, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
It's going fine and dandy. Feeling good.
Great. Corey, how's everything going in your world? How's the Player Power podcast, or what's going on with you?
The Player Power podcast has been on quite a little unplanned hiatus, but we keep trying to figure out a time to record, and it just keeps getting pushed back, but we'll figure it out, so stay tuned for that.
Everyone should go subscribe to get ready for the next episode.
Yeah, there you go. But other than that, I've been doing a lot of this with you and doing a lot of Tier Force Heroes.
Yes,
so everyone should check that out.
Check that out. Okay, over on the ZD YouTube. So Oracle of Ages, I guess this is kind of a double wrap up because we were sort of combining this one. There's been a gap, but this is really a culmination of the past two games. But Corey, how has your time with Oracle of Ages been?
Oracle of Ages was a lot of fun. I went into this expecting Oracle of Ages to kind of overperform against Oracle of Seasons at least. And it's just really interesting, examining the dungeons the way that we do, like how differently it kind of changes my opinions. Because my opinions have changed a little bit since we started this series.
Like with Ages, I mean, I'm sure with all the games, but in Ages, how so? Because I guess I'm looking at your list, and for you, it mixed in a little bit more. It looks more even with Seasons to me.
Yeah, it did, and that's funny because, if you had asked me, even just a few months ago, even like before we started Seasons, which game had the better dungeons, I would say hands down Oracle of Ages. I would say like not even in the same ballpark. Not even close. Ages has better dungeons. But clearly if you look at my list, I do not think that's the case at all now. I think that I still think Oracle of Ages leans a little bit higher. I think we were talking and you said that it has higher highs, and I definitely agree with that. Mm-hmm. And I also think Oracle of Seasons has a little bit lower lows, but overall, they did pretty much stack up relatively close together for me. They do a lot of similar things, and I just think they both have a really solid set of dungeons.
Yeah, I think we have, even though they come up differently on our lists, I think we have kind of a similar idea about the two games, or like how the two dungeons compare. I think some of my favorite dungeons in that I put well above some of my favorite dungeons in Seasons, but I do think overall they kind of slot in together pretty well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I just went a little bit stronger on the ones I really liked compared to you.
I think it looks like you, especially with Seasons, your Seasons dungeons slotted higher. Or at least a bigger chunk of the game slotted higher for you than it did for me.
Yeah, for sure. I felt like Ages for me, the first dungeon, I felt like maybe it was too, because I was coming off of Seasons, where we got to a bit more meaty dungeons, and then going back to Spirit's Grave felt a little basic for me, like. Mm-hmm. Even more basic than what I remember of Seasons and starting out there. But then I felt like I don't know. That's how it came off to me. Like that was much more simplistic to me than Gnarled Root. And it didn't have Gnarled Root at least had some of the callbacks, which were kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I think more backtracking too, even though it was kind of minor. Whereas Spirit's Grave, I felt like I kind of followed a path on accident,
Yeah, yep.
So I was like, okay, this is kind of simplistic, but it was, it's a decent introduction kind of dungeon. But then I felt like after that, the jump from 1 to 2 for me was much greater as opposed to Seasons, where it felt a bit more incremental.
Yeah, definitely.
And it was because I think the puzzles really made a difference. Like, there was just some fun little puzzles, even in Wing Dungeon or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, they really do. This really is a pretty puzzle-heavy game. And I actually, the beginning of the game is the beginning of the game is actually, I didn't put Spirit's Grave that far away from where you have it on your list. We have them in kind of similar locations, but for some reason I feel like, for me, the kind of that whole intro chunk of Seasons, the dungeons I actually feel Seasons has the more basic dungeons, especially because, you know, the game started as like a remake of the original for the Game Boy Color. And I feel like that really kind of comes through in those first Seasons dungeons. So it's like those first 3 in particular, I kind of play through them and I'm like, all right, this is cool, this is fun, but it doesn't really get to the really interesting stuff until Dancing Dragon. Whereas
I pretty much agree. Like, looking at my list, it's the same thing, just in a different area. But I have Wing Dungeon over the first 3 Seasons dungeons, like you did.
Yeah. Yep. I
cool.
thought Spirit's Grave was kind of cool. I thought it was fine for an intro dungeon. It's definitely not. Yeah. If you played it, say you started Ages immediately after you finished Seasons, it's definitely gonna feel like a pretty big step backwards. But I think, you know, since these games, they're tied together, they kind of go hand in hand, but also you can approach them in any order. We just kind of happened to play Seasons first. So I feel like maybe if you played Ages first and you played through Spirit's Grave and you're like, okay, that's cool, that's fine. And then you played Seasons after Ages and you got to Gnarled Root, you might think that one was a little simple, you know?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. And I ended up coming to in my head that I felt like there was like a little bit more with like backtracking in that and stuff, like I mentioned, but I don't know if I actually, you know, if that's just what I was like trying to think of why, or I don't know. I couldn't quite put it together, but yeah, you might be right.
You never know. Maybe we should play them again, but we'll start Ages first.
Reverse? Well, yeah, because we could bring the secrets into that game. Sure, yeah. Is there a dungeon you think you would really want to highlight, or like what stuck out to you about this? What was your favorite aspect of the dungeons in Oracle of Ages?
We talked about this towards the end of Seasons, because both Oracle games, I think, take really big swings in terms of what you can accomplish with a 2D dungeon as opposed to a 3D dungeon where you might be able to, you know, make set pieces much more evident or apparent, right? I think they really push the boundary with like the themes and what the dungeon is going for in the Oracle games. And for Seasons, we really started to get there towards the late game. And I think that Ages kind of starts to hit that stride even earlier. And then once it gets to that stride, it just absolutely knocks it out of the park. And my number 1 dungeon for this game happens to be the 8th dungeon, the final full dungeon, which is the Ancient Tomb.
Yeah.
And it's just, after playing through that dungeon, I was like, I was ashamed that I didn't remember it more. Because a lot of times when I think of that dungeon, I'm like, Ancient Tomb, which one's, oh yeah, that's the one with the tablets. And you gotta put them in place. But just the way that dungeon progresses and each consecutive floor lower gets bigger and there's more room to explore, and it's just so thematic. You really feel like that's something you might find in a 3D dungeon. And I think it's telling that I have it right underneath Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time, and I think they thematically kind of are both almost on the same level, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Where does Ancient Tomb, do you factor that in your head with like the other, I guess it's not the final dungeon, but it is? Like, do you think of it in that context, like the final dungeon of the game?
That's a good question. It doesn't. If not,
I feel like
really,
it does.
You do?
Okay. Well, yeah, because here for a couple reasons. One is I mentioned it in my video, but like it literally does have like the final challenges of a lot of the things you did in the game. It incorporates every puzzle element basically.
That's true. Yeah.
And then
No,
I
you know
also
what?
thought like, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I was just, now that I'm going through it in my head, I do think you're completely right, because even though there is like a little bit that comes after it, which I think was,
Yeah.
The Ambi's tower, the Black Tower, is definitely a lot stronger than like Onyx's castle from Seasons.
Yeah, totally.
So I think
definitely.
that feels a little bit more like a solid like end. It's not a full dungeon, but it feels more like a end setup thing. But
It's
Ancient
comparable
Tomb definitely,
to like Turtle Rock in Link's Awakening, maybe.
yeah, and like you're saying, Ancient Tomb has so many. It really tests your skills from what you've learned throughout the game. You're using a ton of your items. There's even swimming sections. Like, it is pretty nuts, and it's a big navigational challenge too.
And like on the one floor where it's kind of open, like that gave me kind of the feeling of both Hyrule Castle in A Link to the Past, or sorry, Ganon's Tower in A Link to the Past, where you kind of have like a lot of routes you can go. And it also has like a big sprawling labyrinth feel of kind of like Death Mountain in Legend of Zelda, where it's just like this big, massive floor that you have to explore.
Sure, yeah. Especially when you look at the map and you see just like the big layout, and it's like, whoa, I got a lot of ground to cover. But
right,
that's something that I think is really, I think this is a really, well, staying on Ancient Tomb, I just think it's a really, really well designed dungeon, because that whole layout of the bottom floor in particular, it's kind of like you need to visit the four corners to get the tablets, and then the tablet where you need to place them is relatively central. And there is kind of like, it does guide you in some ways of which ones to get, but you can also kind of push those boundaries and go in a bunch of different directions
different
at once.
orders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Collect
pretty sweet.
4 tablets. That's kind of in the vein of, I think we mentioned it before, of like Eagle's Tower, or even like the Divine Beasts, where it's like like at least in that section of the dungeon, it's like collect these separate parts in whatever order. So that's kind of cool to like mix that element in too.
Yeah, I do really like that. That's like, it's like a checklist dungeon almost. Like you got to hit points A, B, C, and D before you can, get to the final part of the dungeon. I think that's really fun.
And then like you mentioned it, but it's worth restating like some of the other top dungeons in this game. You hit upon the thematic aspect of them trying to like take stuff that like comes from like Ocarina of Time and stuff like that, and incorporate into a 2D game. And I think they did a good job in Jabu Jabu's Belly, Mermaid's Cave. What else did you have? You had Skull Dungeon up there. That one's a bit more straightforward. But yeah, all those dungeons sort of have. I think they really nailed it with. It's easy to say like, oh, they're just doing this gimmick again, but I think truly they brought something unique to them as well.
Yeah, definitely. I actually don't really feel like these, there is a lot of stuff in this game in general, actually, that it kind of borrows, like even certain NPCs and characters and certain things where you can be like, oh, that's the thing from Ocarina of Time, like Jabu Jabu's Belly, But that dungeon is so completely different from inside Jabu Jabu's Belly and Ocarina of Time that it completely stands on its own as something entirely separate.
It does have its own identity, yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing, Mermaid's Cave even too. It's totally unique, I think, from Spirit Temple in the way it actually works,
Mm-hmm. Even just like going even a little bit more macro, like looking at the entire game, it's based around time travel. And the way the time travel functions, it's almost like swapping between two worlds. So it's kind of like a mixture of what Ocarina of Time was going for and what A Link to the Past was going for with the Dark World and the Light World. But it really doesn't, for me at least, when I'm playing through that game and I'm doing the present time and past time travel, I'm not really that reminded of something like A Link to the Past. It still feels pretty unique.
It actually does fuse those two things, and that's something that I always kind of commend it for, like in the overworld, especially, like, that it did really take advantage of the two world system being time, in a more interesting way than Ocarina of Time, even though Ocarina of Time has some pretty impactful moments regarding that. This game really does it in a way, and I think it's kind of benefited by it being such a smaller scope of a game that you can kind of. I think it's like probably a lot harder to do some of those things in 3D because you would have to do so much work,
Yeah, definitely. And I think in regards to time travel, like I think that Ocarina of Time does that concept more effectively on like a storytelling scale, like as it relates to the story of Ocarina of Time, because it's like you grow up in this area and then you go to the future and you see how these areas have completely changed. And I feel like that's more supposed to evoke emotion in you, like something like you come out of the Temple of Time and Castletown is completely destroyed and Hyrule Castle has been completely obliterated and replaced with Ganon's Castle. And it's like, that's supposed to be like a shocking story thing, right? But with Oracle of Ages, I think the big focus of the time travel element really relates a lot more to the gameplay, because they have concepts like towards the later end, I think it's when you're traveling to Jabu Jabu's belly, it's like you get to that island and one of the guys is like, oh, this island is traveling slowly westward. My ancestors will be living here, and it's going to be slightly different. And then you go forward in time and the island on that screen has shifted like a few tiles to the left, and like that, it uses that in traversing the overworld.
Though it is,
and that's the type of time travel that we see in that game, and I think that's super effective.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I will say, like, some of the time puzzles aren't just like navigation. They do create for some like fun story beats, because it's like you're doing paradoxes or like meeting a character and helping him in the past, like something like that.
Stuff like that, yeah.
Like story puzzles almost, I would say. But obviously they're more of a novelty than they are, like you mentioned with Ocarina of Time. They're not like these big, like, holy cow moments, but all the same, I really like kind of the different narrative threads in each section of this game, especially compared to Seasons, where I always I really didn't like the disconnect in the story and like the world navigation and that. Compared to this, I thought it's always delightful. It's always so nice, like getting the little, like just doing all the little stories and going back and forth through time and, doing these, meeting these weird, quirky characters that are all in this one world, as opposed to Subrosia never quite worked for me.
Yeah, it does really make Labrynna feel like a much more fleshed out world than Holodrum or Subrosia or any place in Oracle of Seasons. But I will say, this is actually something that's kind of been growing on me in my past few playthroughs of Oracle of Ages, especially because at one point I was thinking I was going to play it at the marathon, so I kind of tried to play through it as fast as I could, just like with what knowledge I had. And at some points, even though I do love the narrative elements with the characters and stuff in between the dungeons, some of the sections just feel like Fetch Quest the game. And it's like, it's a little bit, whereas Oracle of Seasons, it's almost similar to Skyward Sword, where it's really puzzle heavy in between dungeons. It's just completely like navigating your way through puzzles to the next dungeon. In Oracle of Ages, take for example the whole section with the Gorons, where you just need to go forward and backward in time and talk to so many Gorons and do this mini game to get this item, to give it to this Goron to get this item. I don't know. It's like, I think the novelty is great, and it's really, like you're saying, the narrative element of that is really fun. But from a gameplay perspective, that isn't that fun to me. Especially if it's something that you've already experienced multiple times. It's just kind of like...
That's what I'm thinking, because I think the puzzles are also, like, cute, that it's like, to me, it's so awesome. You know, like, I don't know. I like those, but they're presented as, like, they are puzzles, whereas I feel like there's some other games where you're just sent to talk to different characters, but, like, there's no puzzle involved. You're just kind of, like, told to go do it. So you're not, like... I don't know. In like essence, those two actions you're doing the same things, but like just them being like little riddles or whatever make it fun to me. Even if I've already done it, I think they're so clever that I like them.
That's interesting, because that actually makes me... I actually feel like those two function and feel very similar, but in a game, say a padded out game like Twilight Princess, where it's just like... you need to go talk to this person to get this thing to happen. It's just like a flag in the game or whatever. It's like they thought, how can we take as many of those as possible and jam them into one in-between section? That's just kind of what some of that...
Ages, you feel like?
Yeah, in Ages.
Okay.
But you know what, though?
I don't know.
It depends. Because, like, take Crescent Island with the Tokay. Like, they're fantastic. They are great, and I love that as a set piece. I love the Tokay, and I love the fact that they're also funny, and it's really clever the way that you need to, you know, be like, okay, I need to use this item, and then I need to use this item, and then I need to use this item, and I need to trade this item, and it's like, that's all really like brain busting kind of, and I really like challenges like that. But at the same time, because it's like in between the parts of the game that to me are supposed to be the brain busting things, it also does kind of feel a little bit like you're grinding to a halt. You know, it's like if I were playing, what is that, Dungeon 3 that's on Crescent Island?
Yeah.
So, like, Grotto. For example, I finished Dungeon 2, and I'm like, oh yeah, let me see if I can get to Dungeon 3 and do it tonight. And... fast forward an hour, and I'm just running back and forth between Tokay, trading my items like, oh, geez, I haven't even gotten to the dungeon yet, you know?
All right. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I like that. As like compared to, you're never held back, because it, like, in a game like where you kind of mentioned before, where it's like you just have to talk to someone to trigger something random, like that doesn't even... like, it doesn't make sense why that would hold you back. Like, I never feel that way in Ages, which is why it never gets to me, because I don't feel like, oh, I need to pick up this bomb so this door randomly opens. It's like, no, I need to bomb this wall, but, like, I have to find the Tokay who's got my bombs or whatever. You know what I mean? And
I know.
And so it's something I like that. I like always feeling kind of... It's not the only way to go, for sure. Like, I also like a game like Breath of the Wild, where it's kind of like no holds barred on where you can go.
Yeah.
But, it's, you know, there are just certain cases where it doesn't work for me. But in this case, it pretty much always does. Pretty much always.
I think it's, you know, it's not... I also don't think it's like they shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that at all, because I do like elements of that. I think just... It just comes down to another personal preference thing, because I also always lend... my favorite Zelda games tend to be the ones where you can do a bunch of stuff in a bunch of different orders, and if you don't really feel like progressing the story, there are plenty of other things that you can just waste your time with. You can just go explore, or maybe try something else out, you know?
I I can see where this would cross the line, because my feeling about it usually is like one thing to do between dungeons, like one kind of set piece is good. But even in the case you mentioned, like with Tokay Island, it's like, well, first you have to do the trading to get the raft made and all that. You know what I mean? It's like,
yep. You need to go back. Well, actually, you know what? That's a funny instance too, because that's kind of, there are multiple instances where you can't start progressing the thing you need to do until you run into Ralph. And that's another example of that, where you need to go into the past and you need to start walking towards Rafton's house, and then Ralph will bump into you and be like, oh, what are you doing? I'm up to this, blah, blah, blah. And then you can go talk to him and stuff.
That
I do
an
think it's funny.
actual chance. That is an actual situation of like, no, of what you were saying of like, that is a random thing. Like that's
just
not
like a flag. Yeah.
I didn't know I need to go here for sure. I will give you that. It has a thing of Twilight Princess as an example, jumping ahead of where like, I feel like you always do like one thing and it's like, all right, I did the thing to go to the dungeon. And now it's like, no, you have to do two more things.
Yeah. No,
the difference
sorry,
here
keep going. Yeah.
Is that's like a 2-hour chore as opposed to like, oh, I have to do another 20-minute puzzle. Like,
I feel that. Yeah, I get that. That's fair.
So I mean, we were talking about the story, so that might as well be a good way to get going to the end. Overall, we mentioned sort of the different narrative, like there is like not just the little vignettes of puzzles you do between the dungeons, but there is like an overall story that does actually come up. It comes back up, and you do participate in that as the game progresses. Did you like that? I think it was much more interesting than in Seasons.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that 100% Aegis does much better than Seasons. I don't think Seasons has a very effective story at all. And I did just kind of like, well, some of those moments with Ralph can feel a little bit like, okay, I'm just talking to you just to keep going in the game. I do actually really appreciate a lot of those moments, because it's really funny to see that the story is progressing along with or without you, you know? Like Ralph, hypothetically, the character Ralph is going and doing these things without you regardless, to also try and advance the plot. And there are multiple, say like in Seasons, the whole conflict starts in the very beginning when Din gets captured, and literally that's it. For the rest of the game, It's just you got to keep going through dungeons until you can get to the place where she is. Whereas in the beginning of Ages, you know, it's Impa that's what's the word? Possessed by Varen, and then Varen possesses Nehru, and then Varen possesses Ambi, and then you keep getting reminders that the tower is getting built higher, and it's definitely incorporated into the game much better.
There's some progression, yeah. Like you go there and you meet them, and
for sure.
And even with the Ralph stuff, it does build his kind of character and stuff like that. So it's not like you know, this is like very deep or whatever, but it's just a nice little story. You know what I mean?
It's fun, like, yeah. Especially like the whole. That's something where all those little run-ins with Ralph and the building of his character really do kind of build up to something, because in the end you find out, you know, he's a descendant of Ambi, and if you're gonna go take Ambi down, he goes and he's about to sacrifice himself, like, because if Ambi gets taken down, he's not gonna ever be born, you know.
And this is like fitting with him, because the whole time he's been way too over enthusiastic. You know what I mean? He's just kind of rushing into things, so then his final moment there is, you know, aligned with his character. So yeah, like you're going around, we're collecting what is it, the essences of time. What did you think about collecting those as opposed to the essences of nature?
I don't know. It's the same. It feels the same to me. Honestly, I think I paid even less attention to them this time, because like, what's an essence of time? you know?
Okay, because there's pros and cons to this. Because the essences of nature, it felt like we're helping regrow the Maku tree, like re-energize it.
You got the soil, the water, I feel like it's
essences
all.
of time are strange to me.
I don't really get them. I don't even know. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head one essence of time.
Wow. Well, the thing that I like about that, at least, is that it's like, it kind of, because the essence of nature, there was a poetic element to it, but I always felt like this was their version of the instruments from Link's Awakening, which you could never recapture. I think how cool that is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think those is like you're done. Whereas, but then when it comes to these, they're kind of so abstract that it became cool again, because it was like, I don't know, one of the essences of time is sacred soil. That's also an essence of nature, isn't it? No, it's probably something else, but you know what I mean? Like, but then it's like, what's that?
I'm gonna do a really quick lookup of them right now, just because I, for the life of me, cannot remember any of them.
Well, there's Spirit's Grave was a flame one. Eternal Spirit.
Yeah. All right. So I
yeah,
got a list of them right now. Why don't we run through them real quick, and we'll just give a little.
Okay.
We
Power
have
ranking.
We have the Eternal Spirit. We have Ancient Wood. We have Echoing Howl. We have Burning Flame, Sacred Soil from the Crown Dungeon, Lonely Peak, Rolling Sea, Falling Star.
I don't know. There's something like there's something magical about all of these things. You know, these are an essence of time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do like the way that they all. I kind of get what you're saying. It's like more than just like, this is soil, this is the rain which helps grow the seeds.
This is like the fabric of all existence.
Yeah, and it's the way that they play into, the way that they're associated with time, I think is really cool. But at the same time, they have nothing to do with the game.
They restore the Maku tree's memory, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
And once again, we get the big nut.
The big nut. Man, both of these games are just really like, thanks for getting those. Now I can give this to you finally.
Yeah, but I think it made a little bit more sense with the other one, where I was like, okay, I'm regrown. I produced this nut. This one's like, my memory is back or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Now I remember what you have to do. Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So you mentioned Ralph. We're heading off to the Black Tower, and that is where that scene occurs. Why don't we talk about the Black Tower itself? Because you've already kind of said it, but I think it does a little bit better job than some of these like fake last dungeons that we've talked about before. Like Onyx's Castle is definitely a big culprit here. The egg we said was a good case, you know, but like I think this one makes a strong case as like it almost is a dungeon. We're not putting it on the list. We're just kind of ignoring those now, but I think it does come really close, and I think it actually, there's not even much I would really change about it. Like, I think it's actually fine how it is.
Yeah, I do. It's definitely stronger than those other two.
I think it's because it doesn't, like, there's not really, like, we kind of talked about how the puzzle was kind of random in the last dungeon, and there was a mini boss. Facade was in there, and it felt very like a half measure, whereas this had that kind of feeling of it's like they just cut off the top half of Ganon's tower or whatever, and it's just the part where you're like fighting, and that's kind of how I felt. Like, why didn't they just do that with Onyx's Castle? You know,
I agree.
Like,
well, it feels like that's
why.
That's actually really why Onyx's Castle bugs me so much, because it's like this feels like a proper. Well, it doesn't. There's not much to it. It's really just going up floors, a bunch of enemies in a row, and then there's sections where it's like there's a staircase maze, and then there's one of the things I don't like is the room where you get to a room and it's just a bunch of staircases and you just have to pick the right one. I think that's kind of a pain. That's a little cheeky for me. That feels a little
Yeah.
bit like, kind of like, oh, which one's the right one? And if you just happen to get unlucky, you go through like 40 staircases until you get to the right one.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. It doesn't bug me too much, but it's not. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
well, now that I know which one it is, it doesn't bug me. But but
Yeah.
that being said, I do think that's kind of like a proper little build-up gauntlet. It feels a lot like you said in Ocarina of Time. After you get past the section with the themed rooms, it feels like that ascent where it's like you go up and it's building up to the final boss and you get some enemies and you keep going up. Or same thing in Wind Waker where it's like a really long staircase and there's enemies on the floors, and Twilight Princess.
Yeah,
a lot of these games do something similar and just kind of lump it into the final dungeon. And I appreciate this in that sense.
Yeah, because I feel like with Ancient Tomb, you do have a killer like final dungeon, in my opinion. And so this works for me as just like like building hype. It's a little bit more unceremonious to just go fight the boss,
Yeah, definitely. How do you feel, though? I have a question specifically about the Black Tower. And I guess I'm always a proponent of these types of, whether it's in the final dungeon or whether it's just right before the final boss, I'm a big fan of these type of hype building moments with like gauntlets of enemies and stuff like that. But in the Black Tower, once you get through all of these enemies, and there are some tough enemies, that staircase maze has like a bunch of blue Wizrobes, and you can take a lot of damage. And there's like Lionels and Tektites and stuff like that. You can take a lot of damage just getting up there. And then once you get to the point where you're about to go fight Ambi, there's not really anything to help you. There's not a healing point. There's not like a great save point or anything like that. It's almost kind of punishing if you don't get up there with enough hearts, because then if you go into the final battle and you die and you decide to continue, I believe it just places you right after that gauntlet, but you don't have all the hearts you had anymore. Or if you save...
Isn't there a pot with like a fairy somewhere? I could have swore there was at least like a fairy in a pot or something that was like fairly obvious. But now I'm not sure.
There might be, but like fairies in this game don't. It's not like they don't fill your whole health. They only do what, like 8 hearts or something. And you take a lot of damage in this fight. The fight's pretty tough.
It was similar to, actually, I had this with all the final bosses in this game, but it was also similar to Onyx, where I personally struggled a lot over and over and over fighting it, and I kept dying, and I kind of enjoyed it, because I do enjoy that, like dying over and over to a boss. But then I had this like weird switch flip where the last time I fought it, similar to Onyx, I just like did amazing. Like, it didn't feel incremental.
Yeah.
It just feel like it clicked, and I was like, all right, like, you're not killing me anymore.
Yep.
What'd you think of the boss?
Historically, I've always had trouble with this boss. I do think it is pretty tough. Specifically the phase when Varen is transforming into the multiple different animals, like the spider and the turtle and the
Yeah, and the way you
What's
have
the
to
other
react to them all is so different.
yeah, it
A
is
spider, a
completely
turtle, and
bee.
a hornet or something.
Big bee, yeah, hornet. And then you have to use, I'm pretty sure you have to use different items for all of them, or at least a few different ones. And that is usually the one that gives me a lot of trouble. I think I might have done it on my first try this time. And part of that is because, well, I do think I do have a lot to say about this final boss, because the phases, specifically those, I do like that it's a pretty long boss fight, and I do like that it's challenging. But that last phase, where she's transforming into multiple different beasts, I feel like they are very much not the same difficulty level. Certain ones, like the turtle one.
I totally agree. Where you you hope you get the turtle one, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why I beat it on the first try, because I didn't see the bee one once. She turned into a spider once, and the rest was turtles. So that one's pretty easy, because you can just charge up your spin attack and just wait until she's about to land, move over a tile or two, and then spin attack, and just keep rinse and repeat, you know? But if like the bee one, that's hard. And the spider one's pretty hard too. So
it's so hard, yeah.
It's just
it's
really
still
interesting.
Pretty killer boss fight though, right? What did you say?
I do think it's cool. But I
pretty much agree with your criticism though.
I just think that's interesting that you can have a very different time depending on the RNG of how that fight goes, you know, which kind of feels weird for a final boss.
Yeah, it maybe would have been better if it was like different phases or something, you know?
Yeah. Or even if like at least even if it cycles through them one by one and not just like randomly like I'm a turtle, all right, now I'm a spider. All right, now I'm a turtle again.
It makes me think of in Link's Awakening, there's all those different phases and like some are like way easier than others, but like the fact that like they're all, you know, it's all the same, you know?
Yeah,
it makes it not as bad.
Mm-hmm.
Or really not bad at all. It's just like, oh yeah, here's this phase. Like, okay, sounds good to me. Like a different rhythm, I guess.
Also, like both main antagonists of the Oracle games, both Varen and Onyx, I think they both look pretty intimidating in their regular like human forms, and they both have a moment of like, oh, this is my final form. And I just think it's like when Onyx turns into the like dark dragon Onyx or whatever, he looks absolutely insane, even just as the sprite without any artwork. And I think it's an absolute shame that I'm pretty sure there's no official artwork for either of their final forms. Like, I just wish that existed somewhere, because I think it's kind of a little bit funny that Varen already looks incredibly imposing as like a woman, as a sorceress, right? And then she's like, oh, get ready, you're going to see my final form. And she turns into like a fairy with like a funny haircut. And then she turns into like a turtle and a bee and a spider. Like, I don't know.
I liked it because I was like, oh, she's like actually a weird scary creature. I don't know, there was something kind of like, I don't know, there was something like cosmically scary about it a little bit, that she like transforms and also these weird freakish monsters, as opposed to it makes more it fits her character, I guess, compared to Onyx, who's kind of he's big General Onyx, and he turns into this big dragon,
just turns into a dragon.
That is cool too, but I think they suit their characters pretty well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I really just wish there was like some artwork to accompany it, you know, because I think the spider's scary, and I think the bee is scary, but the turtle, not really scary.
It's kind of funny, yeah.
It just has like her face like right in the middle.
It makes you, what is her final form then? Is it the little like fairy devil form, or
I don't remember when she says that line, if it's before the fairy or before the animals, but I don't know.
Maybe.
Oh, it's like this one also has some Dark Links, right? We get a return of Dark Link.
Yeah, there's some Dark Link sprites.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's unique to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you fight. There's I think it has a better job of introducing like the actual Oracle into the fight. That's cool how they incorporated them both, but I think using the switch hook in this was way cooler. And you it's a rematch of a fight you already did.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's a really cool concept. Had that been? I'm trying to think how many times that had really been done before, because you have like Aghanim in A Link to the Past, where you fight him in Hyrule Castle, and then you fight him again at the end of Ganon's Tower. Were there really any
Phantom
other ones?
Ganon is kind of a similar thing. Yeah. Different Phantom character, Ganon. But Yeah. Wizrobe.
Oh God, don't even. I don't want to talk about Wizrobe.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's cool, and it's a cool concept for a fight too, because like ricocheting the seeds and then
very
pulling
cool.
the like they're all like clever, like they're both challenging but also like puzzly, and that's something worth pointing out about a lot of the bosses is like they do have these like puzzle elements to the boss, but there's still some like dexterity involved, you know? It's not just like you learn it's not like King of Dodongo and Ocarina of Time where it's like you know the solution.
Yeah, you do the one gimmick
much
and
to
then,
it. Yeah.
Shout out to
Yeah,
Head Thwomp, the boss Head Thwomp.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like him, but I had fun this time around.
I think it's pretty fun just playing basketball as a as a boss battle.
Yeah, that's maybe not the most fun dexterity, but it still takes. It's definitely harder than King of Dodongo.
Yeah, for sure.
Defeating Varen here, it's not even the end because we did the linked game. What did you think overall of the linked game concept this time around? Did you enjoy it?
Well, I may or may not have forgot to do a linked game.
Oh, you didn't do the linked game.
I did not do the linked game, but I do know.
What?
I know. I'm sorry. I forgot to enter the password at the beginning.
Oh my God.
But I do remember how it plays out for the most part. You have finally this stuff with Twin Rova comes together. And really the big highlight is the battle with Ganon, I feel like.
Yes. But there is like Twin Rova, it's kind of interesting, their overall scheme. I sort of just kind of don't think about it, but it is funny that it's just like you're fighting Onyx and Varen, and the whole time they're just like, yeah, the torches are being lit. Ganon's coming back, and you're like, then why do I care about these guys?
Yeah.
I think there's probably a reason, and it just doesn't matter, but it was so funny. They're just kind of like hanging out the whole time, being like, yeah, we're helping them, but really, they don't matter.
It almost feels like a DLC thing, almost, where it's like, download the DLC and get the Ganon fight,
Yeah. I feel like it's such a fun concept that...
It is. It's a really cool idea.
It's the thing, like, we talked about... We talked about elements, I think, in a lot of Zelda Dungeon videos that could be better regarding this, but at the end of the day, I kind of, don't care, because I just think it's, a fun little gimmick, that... Okay, even if it's not, the story with Zelda getting captured here is the best, it's just kind of a cute little concept that I think that's what makes it fun. I'm not coming to this yes, this epic linked game story is gonna blow my mind,
Yeah, it's nothing crazy, but it is a lot of fun, and that fight with Ganon is very difficult, if I remember correctly.
I fought him. This might sound bad, but I think I fought him for an hour.
Yeah, he's actually really tough.
I don't think if this was a game, well, it wouldn't be linked, but I was thinking about doing if I ever had to do a game like this at the marathon, I don't think I could compete.
No, God no.
Because some of the bosses I would just get stuck on for a long time. But I love it. I love fighting these bosses.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun, but it's really tough. It's really trying.
It is. The fight itself is an example of well, actually it's mostly you do damage with your sword. No, it's that classic learn his different patterns for his attacks, and some of them you hope don't come up as much. But I don't know. Yeah, it's so satisfying. I love.
But isn't it? I'm trying to. There's something about this boss. Maybe it's only if you have the regular sword. I don't know if you got the noble sword on your playthroughs.
I did, and that's pretty necessary because he takes so much many hits.
I remember at one point fighting him, and I don't know if it's just the way the boss is, or if I didn't have an upgraded sword enough, but I could only damage him with spin attacks. and it just made it that much harder.
Yeah, no.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. You want the noble sword, for sure. You need to be powered up. It's not one where, like, that's one thing. Like, this boss, again, it feels more like you said a DLC thing, so it does really require. If this was like in the main game and like there was this crazy difficulty spike, I would be a bit more like critical of it. But since it's like, I don't know, this extra final boss, like, I think it's fair to be like, you need to be the most powered up to fight it, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a really cool fight. It's a great bonus. You save Zelda. The world time is fine again. And that's it. That's the credits, I guess, of the game. And we've ranked all the dungeons already, so we don't, there's no big reveal here in placements, but I guess we can talk about our averages and stuff like that, our scoring system for the games. We have here our average dungeon ranking. That is where, you know, we average the positions of every dungeon, and then we have our dungeon power, which is we just assigned points per every place, so that one favors, of course, games like A Link to the Past, which have more dungeons. Mm-hmm. Do you have any big takeaways from our lists here?
Well,
how about the average starting with?
So for the average, my two things are this kind of does solidly have, if we're going based off of this metric and by the other metric, I do have Oracle of Ages just above Oracle of Seasons, and I think that is pretty spot on. I do think that's how I feel in general about the Oracle games when it comes to the dungeons. I think I would prefer Oracle of Ages dungeons over Seasons pretty much any day of the week, but it's not by a huge margin. And the other thing that really interested me when I was doing this is it looks like A Link to the Past and Oracle of Ages for me are exactly tied in terms of average spot on this list. They're both at 28 and a quarter.
So is that a good sign? Is that saying good things about Oracle of Ages for you?
I do think that kind of, you know, it's like in my mind, it's like, all right, props to Oracle of Ages. That's fair. But this
shows are different. Oh, so go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it's just at the same time, it kind of goes back to, you know, we always talk about, do these numbers really mean anything? Because like, I do think, you know, if I'm really thinking about it, I think they have some similar caliber dungeons. But if you were to ask me, regardless of any list, which game I think I enjoy the dungeons of better, which game has better dungeons, I think I might say A Link to the Past, because in an instance like this where the average placement is tied, but one game has a few dungeons more than the other, I think I would just give the edge to the game that has a few more dungeons, because I'm a big fan of games that have a lot of dungeons, you know?
I think the data still supports this if you look at the second list as like a tiebreaker almost.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Not to, like I said, I like doing these lists and stuff. It's the premise of the show, but yeah, I don't want to just say like these are quantifiably my opinions.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess for my interpretation of the average, like I feel like it does show to me that I think for me, this game is really solid in delivering like really, really solid dungeons. And so it does actually go pretty high for that. I do think it's a little bit overlooked in that regard, but like we kind of mentioned before, it does, like a lot of times, it probably doesn't stand out to a lot of people because it does similar things to like Ocarina of Time, but in 2D, which is less appealing to other people. It's a bit more, you know, they just kind of think of it as like, oh, that's the, you know, they just did that Ocarina of Time stuff in 2D and kind of disregard it.
Yeah. You're something that's really standing out to me on your averages is how low Ocarina of Time is ending up. Like it's just above Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you gotta look at the other list. Which
Even
but yeah,
even on the other list, it's only like towards the middle.
well,
You know?
I think we're seeing our preferences, I think, a little bit here. I've always felt like that was kind of what I assumed going into a lot of these, but I think the 2D, I like the experience of the 2D dungeon a lot more, because, well, honestly, from Ocarina of Time up are all games that I think have awesome dungeons. You know what I mean? Like if you,
Yeah.
if again, I know the numbers, it's not like the most important thing, but if you go and watch the definitive ranking of Zelda on Zelda Dungeon YouTube, pretty sure I gave Majora's Mask a 5. I gave Link's Awakening a 5. I gave Seasons a 4. Wished I gave A Link to the Past a 5. I think I gave Ocarina of Time a 4.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I mean? Like, we're talking about, these are like, this run is my favorite games for the most part, of like dungeons in particular. So it looks like Ocarina of Time is really low, but in reality, I think it's one of the best games ever made. So,
yeah, see, that's what's really, so you don't think this is really indicative at all of your your overall view of these games?
No, I do. I what I think it indicates is how much I love a lot of these games. You know what I mean?
More than
Like,
Ocarina of Time?
Well, we're just talking about one aspect of the game, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, that I think that also speaks to kind of a lot of people play Zelda for a lot of different reasons, and I think this also speaks to like how much you prioritize a solid set of dungeons in the game versus whatever else the game has to offer, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for me, I like Ocarina of Time more than, well, let's put it this way. Of the games that I have above Ocarina of Time, I would say like 3 of them, if you said like, that's my favorite Zelda game, it's better than Ocarina of Time, for sure, I would be like, okay, I can easily buy that. You know what I mean? So like, these, yeah, like I said, these are like kind of my Mount Rushmore games. So yeah, the Oracles maybe I don't like more than Ocarina of Time, but I do think, just in terms of like fun gameplay in the dungeons, I think for me they do deliver a little bit more. I like that. I just like that challenge a little bit, you know, whereas Ocarina of Time, I feel like it's a little bit more of, you're on a journey, it's a mood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
like, yeah, Jabu Jabu's belly in Ocarina of Time is more of a vibe than it is a challenge.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I think what we see though with mine, comparing it to the dungeon power, is that I think Oracle of Ages and Link's Awakening like rock. Like, I do think they both have like, I think they're just consistent. You know what I mean? Like, even if you don't think they're your favorite, I think you can say they're like pretty consistent. I think delivering both like a good amount of really good dungeons.
Yeah, definitely. Our dungeon power lists are pretty dang similar. With the the only thing that's different is that Oracle of Ages and Ocarina of Time are flipped.
Yeah, which I think, yeah. So this goes to show that I think we have, I think what's interesting is we kind of have different interpretations of what we like a lot, but there's a lot of things that we kind of agree on, or like,
Yeah.
you know, it's just how much we agree. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
how we were
exactly.
talking earlier about like, ages and seasons, like our opinions kind of lining up, but at different spots on our list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the Oracles. That was pretty exciting, don't you think?
Very exciting. It's good.
So I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but with the end of this, I feel like, even though I said this is kind of like my favorite era, I do feel like we're coming to sort of an end of like what I view as kind of like the classic era of Zelda, and I think with our next season we're taking a step forward into like a new direction. And I think that's almost going to be the premise of the game itself, which is Wind Waker. What do you think of that? Do you feel like, I feel like, especially with these dungeons being a little bit more like reinterpreting, just iterating a lot on previous games, I feel like they're kind of more closing the book on these classic style Zelda dungeons and really Zelda game. And yeah, what do you think? Wind Waker, is this going to be a breath of fresh air?
Yes, I definitely think so. It really is a kind of an ushering in of a new era of the whole Zelda series, and I think you're completely right. Like, a lot of this has been a journey from the very first Zelda game, seeing how that room-to-room structure of a dungeon has evolved over the course of, the whole game, or the whole series. And I think the Oracle games are kind of the really last remains of what that dungeon structure evolved truly looks like. And I think with Wind Waker, we're going to start to see it evolving, but in a different direction, Yeah.
I'll definitely go, we'll see. I mean, we'll definitely go back to this style stuff for sure. But I think there is kind of a need to be even more different in all the games coming up, for the most part. Some are maybe more of the same, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
That being said, I'm on the games coming up. I'm pretty strong on them.
Yeah, this is kind of your game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is this your number one game?
This is my number one. My favorite game ever.
Okay, well that'd be interesting, and so I'll say with that, I've kind of talked to you. I'm not gonna fully reveal because I don't know what I'm for sure gonna do. I mean, I feel like I know, but I don't want to like say it and then go back on it. But we are gonna. I think I want to try a different format for the Wind Waker because I feel like I'm like usually not as up on its dungeons, but I just kind of with different seasons of the show, I've tried to like highlight unique things about the game and not treat them all the same. Especially I try to highlight stuff out even outside of the dungeons. And so with Wind Waker, I want to cover the dungeons obviously, but I also want to give I guess my favorite aspect of the game its due. So we're probably going to do something different with the video format. We'll see. It's sound like a good idea to you?
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
Okay. And so yeah, I don't know what the release will be. There'll probably be a bit more of a gap because I'm about to like move and stuff. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens. I maybe even change the release format. I don't know if this will be. Leave a comment on what you think the release format should be. I'm thinking either, we do it might be a longer gap, or maybe I'll just spread the videos out more. You know what I mean? Like maybe
a little bit more time in between or something.
Trickle them out. I don't know. The scope. This is like I think our first massive game we're doing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So just like there's, I think the step in the scope of the game is pretty large, even though there's less dungeons, and I kind of wanna like capture it. At least not all of it, but some of the game. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, anyway, once again, Corey, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your dungeon feelings. Always good to have your perspective.
Oh yeah, love it. Love talking dungeons with you, Goo.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks to everyone for listening. Of course, subscribe, join the Discord, go watch Tier Force Heroes, follow Corey wherever. And thanks for watching.